Chapter 3. You're not focusing on you. Beneath our boots, the bone-dry stones crunched as we edged ever closer through the tangled scrub that surrounded our target. Amid the crackle of enemy gunfire, our radios would burst into life with the static-edged voices of the team leaders. Minimal, abrupt, nobody talking more than was needed. Alpha present, Bravo present, standby to move. There was always something reassuring about their unshakable calm, whatever the situation. Their voices might get louder so they could be heard and understood over the chaos of a firefight, but that confident, unhurried tone almost never changed. Charlie 4-4, Charlie 5-5. Right, we're going to take the eastern compound. You take the western compound. Let me know when the compound's clear. Go, go, go. The moment I hit the deck and began crawling forwards towards an enemy compound, I'd always be able to hear my breath coming in jagged gasps. I tried to cover the ground as fast as I could, my nose and mouth filled with the unmistakable smell and taste of the desert. This was always the first thing I sensed as I leapt out of the helicopter, the sour cocktail of dust, sand, and ancient earth that the rotors churned up from the ground. It's the taste of combat, or more precisely, the taste of the anticipation of combat. The moment I clocked it, I was straight into the game. All my senses heightened, as if somebody had turbocharged my adrenaline. This is when our training and experience kicked in. This was what we prepared for. This was what we lived for. War is brutal, cruel, and unfair. It always leaves pain and tragedy in its wake. I know that. But in the middle of the slaughter, there are always strange spaces full of stillness and beauty. I have been a witness to the uncomfortable and yet exhilarating outer edges of human experience. I know the head-spinning excitement of victory and the bone-gnawing sadness of losing friends and comrades. It was my privilege as an elite soldier to see and feel all of this. This enlargement of my universe was only possible because I'd focused on myself. I'm only sitting here writing this book because I've been willing to put myself first, even though I know at times doing so has made the lives of other people I care for a bit harder. That might seem like a brutal thing to say, but it's true. When I was out doing hardcore operations, I was putting my needs ahead of my family. Exactly the same was true of climbing Mount Everest or sailing around the Pacific for bounty. In each of these cases, I wasn't just removing myself from my family for extended periods of time. I ran the risk of disappearing from their lives forever. I know how difficult all of this was for Emily, and I know how lucky I am to have such a supportive, amazing wife. I'm sure it was difficult at times for my kids too. And yet, I also knew that I needed to do these things. Being part of a special military unit was a culmination of years of hard work and dedication. It made me a better, more fulfilled man. Scaling Mount Everest helped me achieve a long-held dream and offered me an extreme challenge at a time when I was desperately searching for one. They were all events that helped me grow and improve. Without them, I wouldn't be the person I am now. If I'd passed these opportunities up, I know I'd have spent the rest of my life regretting the fact. And I'm pretty sure that the regret would have turned to resentment. The fact that I didn't is because I knew how important it is to focus on yourself. One of the biggest lies out there is the idea that it's selfish to focus on yourself. It's seen as somehow self-indulgent, or at least something you shouldn't even begin to think about until you've dealt with everybody else's problems. There's just one problem with this perspective. It's utter horseshit. Do you know why? Because everything starts with you. How are you going to be a positive force for the people around you or in your workplace if you haven't got your own shit together? How are you going to care for others if you don't know how to care for yourself? You can't become the best version of yourself, the version of you that your kids and friends and partners need to see, by magic or by crossing your fingers and hoping. It requires sustained work. But there are great rewards. The better you feel about yourself and your life, the healthier you're going to be. You'll be less vulnerable to illness, more willing to take exercise and engage fully with the world around you. And the happier, healthier and more connected you are, the better a husband, father, friend and colleague you'll be. The truth is, it's very hard to build a satisfying life for yourself from the scraps left over by other people. At some point, if you want to become the best version of yourself, you have to acknowledge that and start focusing on you. Find out who you are. The beautiful thing about every single one of us is that we're all so different. Our emotions, fears and weaknesses are as individual to us as our DNA. That's why I can't just hand you a user's guide to being a human being and let you get on with the business of living. We all have to work out who we are and how we respond to the world ourselves. You don't need to do the extreme things I did. You don't need to kick doors down or climb Mount Everest. You just need to ask yourself some questions, because you can't start working on yourself until you know what you're working with. How well do you know yourself? When it comes down to it, do you know what you're capable of? Are you aware of your strengths? Do you know what your weaknesses are? These might all seem like incredible, easy questions to answer. How could we not know ourselves? After all, we spent our whole lives inhabiting the same body and mind. And yet, in my experience, it's not quite so simple. For one thing, we're not the same person we've always been. We're all in a constant process of evolution, even if we might not realise it. I'd gone through almost my entire career in the military thinking that my destiny was as a special military unit operator. It was only when I left that I realised that wasn't who I was meant to be. It took me even more time and a hell of a lot of mistakes and anguish before I began to even come close to working out who I really was. Another problem is that many of us put up barriers or try to pretend we're one sort of person, when actually we're somebody completely different. That's something I've noticed when I compare the two different versions of SAS Australia. The civilians are there purely for themselves. There's no ulterior motive. They've got issues they need to work through, or they're looking for redemption of some kind. Their emotions are right on the surface straight away. From day one, there are tears, tantrums. You don't really need to work too hard to uncover these people's authentic selves. It's harder when you're dealing with celebrities, because you know that they all have a public persona that they show to the rest of the world. Our job is to rip that down, which I reckon usually takes about 48 hours. That's why it takes guts for celebrities to come on the course. They know that they're going to be exposed. The longer they stay on, the more stones we turn over. The longer they spend looking into the mirror we hold up to their face. We're there to strip every layer away until we uncover their true self. What I tell them is, I want to see you. I don't want to see the sports person or the version of yourself you present to advertisers. I don't even want to see you as a role model. I need to see you as you really are. No crocodile tears, no acting. I can see right through all that. Persist with it and your number will be taken and you'll be gone off the course. The course itself is designed so that people struggle at every stage. We want to see how people deal with failure. We want to see what they do when their insecurities are revealed. Ultimately, we want the chance to identify their weakness. Once we've done that, we home in on it. This is not to punish or torture them, but to see if they really are who they say they are. The weakness is the chink in the armour we need to begin that process. A lot of the time, 3 or 4 days in, when we show the celebrity exactly who they are, stripped down to their bare bones, and ask them if they like what they see, the answer is no. That is the point when a lot of them VW, voluntarily withdraw. They feel far too vulnerable. It's clear that they need that persona. It's what protects them. And more often than not, they prefer the version of themselves they show the public to the person that they really are. It's really brave to strip away the edited version of yourself you show the world. But it's also a necessary process. I understand how it's uncomfortable for people when you talk to them about their flaws. They retreat into themselves, put a brick wall around the things they don't want discussed. They think they're protecting themselves. They're not. They're just blocking 20 or 30% of who they are. You're only going to get to that next level by acknowledging those weaknesses and insecurities. Because the moment you look in the mirror and can say to yourself, yep, these are my demons, is the moment you can begin to work on them. Until you've identified a problem, you cannot solve it. The third problem is that most of us struggle to make the time and space in our lives needed to make that connection with ourselves. There are so many distractions, so many different things tugging at the edges of our attention. But it's so important that I urge you to try to carve out some precious minutes for this crucial process. Shove all of the materialistical stuff aside. Give yourself the breathing space you need to think and reflect. Take the dog for a walk. Before the pandemic, I used to go climbing as much as I could. When I had that distance from phones, meetings and family, I could contemplate where I was at in my life and where I wanted to go next. I could ask myself what about myself I was happy with and what I felt I needed to improve. If you need to, treat it like coursework or a project at work. Make a list of your core values. What are the beliefs and behaviours that you cherish? They could be family or honesty, hard work or empathy. What are your emotional triggers? What are you doing well? What could you do better? You're going to be in your own company for 24 hours a day for the rest of your life. Nobody else can possibly come close to that. Are you happy with the person you are? If not, your time on the planet is going to be a miserable experience. Of course, you can't pick your personality off the peg like a new suit. It's something you have to spend time working on and learning about. You will probably have to go out there and learn some tough lessons. You might be like the celebrities on SAS Australia and find out stuff about yourself that you don't like. But you have to be brutally honest. Lies will just confuse and distort everything. When you lie to yourself, you're just setting traps for yourself that one day you're going to blunder into. Think about the way you interact with others. Watch closely to see how they respond to your actions and words. Put yourself in their heads. Do you like what you see? It's entirely possible that you might not, in which case you have somewhere to start. You should never be embarrassed that you have flaws or things that you need to work on. Shame only comes in when you're too complacent either to ask those questions or to find the solutions the questions demand. This brutal honesty might seem difficult at the moment, but it's hard work in the short term that will pay off mightily in the long term. Every flaw you remove, every improvement you initiate is another brick taken out of the wall that's standing between you and the best version of yourself. But always remember that no matter how much effort you put in, you're not going to change overnight. I reckon I'm at 80% of my potential now, on a good day. But that's a result of years of effort and incremental improvement. That callow, shy boy who turned up for his first day of basic training was working at 20%. That's a hell of a journey. It hasn't always been a smooth progression. I've wasted years trying to figure shit out that I was never going to be able to understand. That's on me. It's a slow process. Sometimes you'll have spells where you're biting huge chunks off. Mostly, though, it's a percentage point here, a percentage point there. What they call marginal gains. And that, by the way, is more than enough. It's okay to look after number one. You're probably not a selfish person. In fact, you probably have the opposite problem. You're too ready to put others' needs and priorities above your own. A lot of us have unconsciously absorbed the idea that it's our responsibility to make everybody around us happy. We might also think that it's incredibly self-indulgent to take the time to ensure that we're okay, or to do the work needed to keep progressing through life. We've all been indoctrinated to think of spending time working on ourselves as selfish. And I sometimes think that society wants us to be happy enough with the crumbs swept from the table. It wants us to squeeze and limit our desires. Now, I'm not saying you should start behaving like a selfish prick. It's not a zero-sum game. But what I am saying is that you should be as kind to yourself as you are to others. Just the act of putting yourself first, even for a little while, can have a psychological impact. Because what you're telling yourself and everybody else in the world is that you think that you deserve that effort. It's a statement about your value. And the more you do it, the more your confidence will grow. It could be really simple things like taking a bit of time for yourself when things get hectic, or treating yourself to clothes that make you feel good. But there are other, more radical things you could consider. Instead of automatically saying yes to doing things that you really don't want to do, consider trying to say no. Other human beings shouldn't take your kindness and generosity for granted. We learn by imitation. If you're always putting yourself last, then the people around you will do the same. Don't confuse being willing to help with being a pushover. Remember, if you give and give and give without ever thinking of yourself, at some point you'll find yourself trying to run on empty. Don't be afraid to assert yourself when something you really want to do comes up, even if it clashes with other people's priorities and needs. If those people really love you, if they genuinely have your best interests at heart, then they'll understand. You've been willing to make yourself uncomfortable at times to allow them the time and space they need to become the best version of themselves. So why do you find it so hard to believe that they wouldn't do the same for you? Emily is good at this. There will be times when I'm busy planning a trip and she'll ask, "Do you have to be away for as long as that?" That's not because she's jealous or bitter, but because she's making sure that her needs are being met. A relationship in which one person takes all the time while the other person gives isn't healthy for either party. You might think that turning yourself into some kind of butler who represses himself and his desires so that he can help others is a noble and generous thing to do. It really fucking isn't. It's not good for you, and it's not good for anybody in your vicinity. Remember that nobody can make you happier. Nobody can make you stronger. Nobody can make you more fulfilled. The only person who can achieve any of this is you. So if you want to make progress towards becoming the best version of yourself, for your benefit as well as for the benefit of others around you, then you're going to have to focus on yourself. The flip side is that you alone cannot make other people happier, stronger, or more fulfilled, and nor is it your responsibility. Support them, help them, be the kind of ally to them you'd want them to be to you. But you cannot take on other people's burdens. You cannot make their happiness your project. At the same time, it's undeniable that a fulfilled, happy, secure person is always going to be a better friend or partner than someone who has made a habit of suppressing their own desires and needs. As I've said so many times before, we all radiate energy every single second of the day. And if you're bored or angry or bitter, that's going to fill every room you walk into. That's why when I get asked whether I wish I could be at home more, I have two answers. The first is, of course, yes. But I know that's not the reality of life. The more honest answer, given that my career and other commitments mean I have to be working abroad or elsewhere in the country a great deal, is that it's far better that I'm away for 50 to 60% of the year, but that when I'm back, I give my family and those I care about the absolute best version of who I am. The other option is giving my family 95% of my time, but only 50 to 60% of a diminished me. What do my kids gain from spending time with a distracted, anxious, frustrated dad? Don't mix your priorities and your responsibilities. Time devoted to yourself should be time dedicated to developing who you are as a human being. Ask yourself, are you progressing in your relationship, with your family, in your professional life? If you're flatlining, then you've probably given up, and it's time for a drastic change. None of this is a license to abandon your responsibilities. Prioritising yourself doesn't mean that you can down tools when it comes to your family or your job. You've still got bills to pay. You can't afford to let yourself become someone who, and this really gripes me, talks about babysitting their own kids. What do you mean? That comes with the territory. You're not doing your family a fucking favour by clearing the lowest possible bar of your parental responsibilities. Before you commit to anything, you must have a clear idea of what your responsibilities are. You need that balance. And that might mean postponing a plan or ambition. That's fine, as long as postponement doesn't really mean cancellation. You can't suppress who you are or try to stop yourself growing. But there's a difference between self-indulgence and self-improvement. I didn't climb Mount Everest because I wanted time away from my family in an interesting location. I climbed it because I knew that the experience would help me change and grow. I didn't come back the same miserable bastard I'd been before. I came back a better person. You shouldn't be trying to escape your life. You should be trying to live it. If you climb that mountain to get away from your problems, then guess what? They're still going to be there when you get back. You're just delaying the inevitable moment when you'll have to face them. By contrast, if you're climbing it because you know the experience will transform you into somebody who's better able to confront the issues lying in wait for you at home, then you're engaged in a deeply positive, life-affirming activity. Exercise. Be better to you. Concentrating on yourself isn't just about self-improvement. It's also about taking positive steps to make your life better. When you're connected with yourself, you'll know what makes you happy and what leaves you sad. Good. Make a concerted effort to ensure that your life is as full of as many of the activities that make you happy as you're able. List 5 things you can do each day to help improve the quality of your life. This might be finding 5 minutes for yourself, or treating yourself to a biscuit, or going for a jog. Bettering yourself is a prelude to bettering your situation and the people around you. It's not prioritising yourself to go out on the lash in Ibiza for half a week, before spending the other half of the week lying on your living room sofa. It's because I put myself first then that I can support my family now. The investment I made in myself was ultimately an investment in my family's well-being. Lessons. You cannot make any progress in life if you don't focus on yourself. You won't be happy in life if you don't focus on yourself. It's not selfish. It's not self-indulgent. It's absolutely fucking necessary. There's only one person on this planet who's responsible for your success and happiness. You. But the opposite is true too. You should never feel as if other people's success and happiness are your burdens to bear. Before you focus on yourself, you need to work out who you really are. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you need to do to realise your potential? Remember that it's never too late to begin this process of breaking down your emotions and start self-reflecting. Your focus on yourself should always be aimed towards a progressive outcome. It's not an excuse to sit on the sofa in your pants, and it should never prevent you from fulfilling your responsibilities. If you show the rest of the world that you value yourself, then the rest of the world is far more likely to value you too. Chapter 4. You're making the wrong kinds of plans. You're never going to get anywhere if you don't know what your destination is. When you don't have goals, your life can too easily become flabby and directionless. Aimlessness might look like freedom, but it's really just another kind of prison. Because when you don't know what direction you're going in, you're just as trapped as you would be if you were thrown into a cell. I have a method for making plans that's individual to me. I believe that you need a what, a why, and a how. But I'm also very skeptical of any plan that commits you rigidly to goals that lie too far into the future. You must give yourself leeway to grab opportunities as they arise. One good example of the way I set myself targets and then go about achieving them would be the clothing line I launched in collaboration with Twins, the lifestyle brand run by my close friends Arf and Jez Farouk. Twins had done a few clothing items, but the thing they'd enjoyed runaway success with was their caps. They release a new cap and it sells out before you can click your fingers. Our idea was to build a range of activewear, clothes for explorers and adventurers. This was something that was outside their comfort zone. Although, come to think of it, they weren't quite as far out of their comfort zone as I was. I wonder what the Ant Middleton of 2007 would have said if he'd been told that within 15 years he'd be designing clothes. Still, we had shared values and a shared enthusiasm for the idea, which in many ways were the most important things. When I do something, I want to do it well. No half measures, no shortcuts, no compromising on anything. The Twins had the same mindset. So that was our starting point. What? If you've got a clear, specific goal, then it's easier to visualize the routes you need to take to get there. Vague dreams are just that, dreams. You must be specific about what it is you want to achieve. Our only ambition with the clothing line was to launch it into the world with the retail chain flannels. I was not worried about anything after that. The reason we were so focused on just getting our product into one store was because we wanted a very clearly delineated target. We could have said, oh, we want to be in every shop, or we want to sell X amount of items by this date. Sure, they're great ambitions to have, but are they really achievable? Of course, I wanted it to do well, but that was out of my hands. No matter how hard I work, I can't force customers to get their credit cards out. That's why, although I'd naturally love it if all my books hit number 1, I never set that as a target for them. How can you measure your progress if your yardstick for success or failure isn't something you can control? It was important too that we focused on what we needed to do to get into flannels specifically. We knew what their criteria was, which gave us something clear to aim for. This wouldn't have been the case if we tried to produce clothes that appealed to both flannels and retailers operating at the other end of the market. We'd have ended up with an awkward compromise product that wouldn't have pleased anyone. As the saying goes, when you try to design a horse by committee, you end up with a camel. So everything we did was aimed towards achieving that single deal. It kept us all on track, and meant we didn't waste time and energy going down too many blind alleys. Why? I also think that when you're thinking about what your aims are, you must be clear about why you're committing yourself to them. As my mate, the boxer Tony Bellew, says, there's no point in climbing into the ring and taking punches if you don't know why you're doing it. What is it that you hope to gain? I always want stuff to serve a progressive purpose. When I look at a new project, I need to know that it'll take me that bit closer to becoming the best version of myself. Perhaps you're looking to secure a new job. Great, but why? Is it because you feel as if you're getting stale in your current position and want a new challenge? Or perhaps it's just that you're looking for a higher salary because you're about to become a parent and want to be able to move to a bigger house. If you're not passionate about the target you want to achieve or can't see what purpose it will serve you in your life, then you're going to find yourself in trouble further down the line. Elsewhere in this book, I talk about the importance of hard work and commitment, but there's a crucial caveat. Hard work without talent or passion is just hard work. There are millions of people who work hard. They're grafting their balls off, but they're doing something they're not good at and have next to no ambition for. If you don't care about what you do, you're never going to put your heart and soul into it. It's just drudgery. And what kind of life is that? A slog with no passion or progression. If you can't throw yourself wholeheartedly into a particular task or course of action, then what are you doing? Maybe this thing wasn't meant for you. If you're not dedicated to being a father, don't have children. If you're not dedicated to being a teacher, then stay the fuck away from the classroom. Because when you're not giving everything, you'll just bimble along, never really getting anywhere, rarely if ever feeling fulfilled. And then one day, you'll come to with a jolt and realise your target is as far away as when you started out. Once you've identified what your motivation is, make sure you hold it close to you. That's the thing that will keep you going when things get wobbly, which of course they inevitably will. When you're stressed, when it looks as if everything is stacked against you, it's so important to be able to remind yourself that you're putting yourself through all this shit for a reason. That's why it really gripes me when I hear about people being told that an important part of the goal setting is writing them down. If you need to consult a bit of paper because you've forgotten what it is that you want to achieve, then it's not a goal, it's a daydream. It's in the same territory as notes kids write to Santa. You should be obsessed with your goals. They should feel tangible, achievable, and they should be something that you want, not what you think is expected of you or that you're doing to please somebody else. I want something that I can taste. The clothing line was something that would take me way out of my comfort zone. I knew that by throwing myself into a world that was so alien to me, I'd give myself the chance to learn a massive amount. It would expose me to unfamiliar places and people, and I'd pick up new skills. There was also the opportunity it offered to do something meaningful with two guys who are really important in my life. The reason I got into business with them was because of who they are. We came up with the vision together, and we believed in it together. I was really attracted to the collaborative nature of the project, and the idea that at the end of it, we'd have created something really tangible we could all be proud of. All of that meant that it was something I knew I was willing to take punches for. How? You're never going to know every detail of every stage of the process in advance. And that's okay. It's important to retain that nimble mindset. You can't afford to be in the position where you start panicking because something has turned out differently from the way you imagined it happening. But you do need to have a good idea of what you've got to do if you're going to achieve your targets. What resources will you require? Do you need to ask anyone in particular for help or advice? Can you think of any problems that might crop up along the way? If so, can you prepare potential solutions? For us, one of the most important priorities was identifying who was going to take on what responsibilities. We all knew we had something to offer, and were all humble enough to know that so did each of the other players. It would have derailed everything if I'd pretended I had expertise in areas which, if I'm going to be honest, I was barely aware of. We were all as keen to learn as to teach. The twins knew what technology to use, the sort of machinery involved in manufacturing clothes that were resistant to wear and tear. They also already had established relationships with factories, and their logistics game was bang on. So, of course, that interested me. I had my own experience of operating in hostile environments, discovering what sorts of clothing work in what sorts of situations. I knew what I was comfortable wearing, whether that was climbing mountains, trekking, running, jumping out of helicopters. I knew what I wanted and what would work for me. Flannels injected their own expertise and know-how into the process. Their commitment to quality is unparalleled and matched our own. Their threshold for what they'll stock is really impressive. They're never going to sell any old tat off the street. We cycled through parts of China, Taiwan and Portugal looking for the right place to make the clothes. A lot of the top brands already operate in Portugal, and the ability to be able to visit the factories on a reasonable, regular basis was also attractive. In our first meeting, they told us that they only produced high-end clothes, almost as if they thought that would put us off. But, of course, that's exactly what we wanted to hear. At that point, we flew out so that we could meet them face to face. There were 9 separate prototypes between showing them our first sketch-out draft and getting the finished product. I loved that, loved the whole process. Whenever I had spare time, I'd try to drive up to Manchester or fly to Portugal. For a while, things like holidays and a social life had to take second place. The day that the launch day came around, I was ecstatic. It was such a privilege to see clothes in store that I'd helped design. And it was so exciting watching people buying them and being as excited about them as I was. Honest to God, I didn't care if it succeeded or not. I was just so proud we'd achieved what we'd set out to do. In the course of 2 years, we'd gone from talking about the clothes to making them. We'd started out with an idea, and now I held a physical manifestation of that idea in my hands. Never forget. What I tried to keep front and centre of my mind throughout the whole project was the thought that we might fail. Not because I was afraid of failure, but because I knew that the outcome wasn't the most important element of the enterprise. I didn't want to be so focused on success that I blinded myself to all the amazing experiences that I was gaining at every stage of the project. If, at the end of the process, Flannels decided not to stock the clothes, I didn't want to feel that everything we'd done had been wasted. Don't look too far ahead. Where I differ from many other people is that although I set and follow short-term goals, I genuinely steer away from medium and long-term goals. And contrary to a lot of received wisdom about targets, I don't like to commit to a rigid timescale. That's because I believe that when you get too set on one target and too attached to a particular schedule, you forget how exciting and full of possibility the rest of the world is. This means you risk developing a dangerous kind of tunnel vision. That tunnel vision is exactly what elite athletes or tech visionaries need. But the conditions of their lives are completely different to mine. And I'll be willing to bet are pretty different to yours too. A too close focus on long-term goals actually ends up being a distraction because it stops you seeing what's really there in front of you. An opportunity might come along and you're so fixated on a particular vision of your future that you let it pass you by. Out of 10 chances that present themselves to me, I might only be pulled towards 3. and only one of those three will come to anything. But it's important to me that at the very least, I'm open to them all. What if one of those opportunities is life-changing? Who Dares Wins changed almost every aspect of my existence. But when I got the call from my producer asking if I was interested in coming in for an audition, I was trying to build a security business in Africa. The idea of going on television or becoming an author didn't figure in my plans. It wasn't that I thought there'd be impossible goals, they were literally inconceivable. I scrapped a business that was already lucrative and promised to be even more so further down the line in order to take a risk. On balance, I reckoned I'd maybe get one shot at one series. But I also had a feeling that there was something there. If I got it right, if I was allowed to run the show the way I wanted it to be run, we could end up making something special. I asked myself whether I was likely to get another chance like this. Probably not, was the honest answer. So I went for it. As it turned out, the show was a big hit, and it's been the springboard for so many other amazing things. But I'm still trying not to look more than 2 years ahead. I just want to keep focused on what's in front of me right now. Always make sure that you keep your eyes open. Stay alert. Don't let any exciting opportunities that's right underneath your nose slip away because you're staring miles ahead at the distant target that you might never ever reach. One last thing. If you want to achieve your ambitions, whatever they are, you must be ready to put a shift in. It doesn't matter if you've devised the best plan in the world. It doesn't matter if you've colour-coded all of your schedules. Unless you're willing to graft and graft, your goals will go unrealised. You have to be willing to keep going when everybody else has given up. You have to be willing to sacrifice holidays, weekends, evenings. Most of my greatest achievements have been earned when nobody else can see. So, if you want to make your dreams become a reality, you're going to have to roll up your sleeves. Lessons. If you don't make any plans or set yourself targets, you'll lead an aimless, unsatisfying existence. You'll struggle to ever make the sort of progress you need. Be as clear as you can be about what you want to achieve. The more specific you are, the easier it will be to construct a path to success. You must have a why as well as a what. That's what will keep you going when times get tough. Don't chain yourself to rigid long-term plans. You should always remain alert to the new opportunities that life will throw up. Don't be afraid of making abrupt shifts in direction or focus. Prioritise your instincts over schedules and tick lists. A plan is only ever as good as the work you're willing to invest in it. If you're not ready to graft, you're never going to reach your goals. Chapter 5. You're a follower, not a leader. One thing I hear a lot from people is that they go through their days feeling cut adrift. They can't seem to grab hold of the reins of their life or exert their will. Somehow, they always end up doing what somebody else wants them to do, not what they themselves want to do. Perhaps they just want to fit in and please others. Or it might be that they're not confident enough about their own judgment, so they always end up deferring to the men and women around them. But the net result is always the same. In my experience, people who let others make their decisions for them are more stressed and unhappy than those who are in charge of their own destiny. They feel powerless and struggle to motivate themselves. It's difficult for those who are followers rather than leaders in their own life to know what to do. And their growth is stunted as a result. I'm not afraid of the world because I rule my own life. But I also understand how hard it is to resist the pressure to follow a path that goes against your instincts, especially in those confusing scenarios where, although you're pretty sure what you don't want to do, it's less clear to you what you do want to do. There are so many who want to push you in a particular direction. Partners, schools, companies. And of course, there's always the expectation to conform to what society deems correct. I remember one occasion early on in my military career when someone tried to push me in a direction that felt completely wrong to me. On that day, I'd gone in to see a warrant officer, a guy I'd always respected and liked, to talk about taking a PTI's course. I wanted to get the qualification to become a physical training instructor. As I entered, I noticed that he was holding a letter. This caught me off guard. What the hell is this about? It was only when he showed it to me that it made sense. Not long beforehand, I'd been asked to translate for a French colonel who was visiting. We had 3 great days working side by side, and it seems that I'd impressed everyone with the job I'd done. Soon afterwards, my unit received a full letter of praise for me. Once I'd read the letter, the warrant officer congratulated me on how well I'd represented the squadron. So far, so good, I thought. He was brimming over with enthusiasm. Absolutely brilliant. Then the mood shifted a little bit. Why not go down that route? The warrant officer asked. Why don't you train as an interpreter? Your French is an amazing skill to have. You're fluent, and I don't understand why you haven't tried to take advantage of it before now. There's so much you can do with it. I didn't know what to say. Whatever else I thought about the army, I knew that I loved hardcore soldiering. When I joined, it was because I thought I wanted to see more of the world. It felt like a ticket away from the beautiful but far too sedate village in Normandy that I'd come to call home. And although I hadn't travelled quite as much as I thought I would, that didn't matter, because I'd fallen in love with the craft of soldiering. Being a warrior was no longer a means to an end to me. It was the end. I was fascinated by it all. I wanted to be a sniper, and then perhaps join a special military unit. I knew I wasn't ready right now, but I thought these were things I could work towards. I'm delighted that they were pleased with the job I did. Sir, I told him, and I'm really grateful that you're thinking about my career like this, but that's not what I want to do. You're not built for soldiering. All the cheer had left his voice. Sir, with all due respect, I don't agree. I was trying to stay calm, even though every atom in my body suddenly seemed to be screaming at me. I'd worked so hard to get to this point, and he was casually suggesting that I just throw everything into the bin. Fuck him. Look, Middleton, I'm trying to do you a favour here. I'm not going to insult you by hiding behind pretty words. You're too small. That's a fact. You've done well to get this far, but unfortunately your physique's going to be a liability. It's a real shame, but there it is. There's a 6-month translator's course in Beaconsfield. You'd come out with a qualification, and between you and me, it'd be a nice, easy spell. Think about it. No need to rush your decision. He must have thought that this would be the clinching argument. In a sense, it was. It removed any doubt I felt about the course I wanted my career to take. I didn't want an easy life. I wanted to be challenged. I wanted stuff to be a bit uncomfortable. 6 months of pissing about pretending to be a student just wasn't me. It's exactly what I joined the army to avoid. And the thing is, I didn't need a bit of paper to tell me I could speak French. At the time, I spoke it as well as I did English. The warrant officer dismissed me with a patronising wave of the hand. I'm fairly certain that once I left the room, he forgot our conversation almost immediately. He told me what he thought was best for me, and had no reason to trouble himself any further about my future. But my head was buzzing with it. Back in our barracks, I told a mate about what had just happened. Beaconsfield, he claimed, his eyes lighting up in excitement. That's where they send all the officers, isn't it? It'll be a 6-month jolly. He was almost rubbing his hands with glee. You'll be mixing with the Ruperts, treated like you're a member of the fucking royal family. I don't want a 6-month jolly. I want to be a soldier. He looked at me, stupefied. It was as if I'd told him I was planning to travel to the moon. I began to question myself. The warrant officer's words nagged away at me. I could see where he was coming from. It's hard not to develop a bit of a complex when someone says something as categorical as that. Doubts began to creep in through the crack that his comments had opened up in my self-belief. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am too small. No matter how hard I trained, I was never going to be able to alter some fundamental things about myself. There was no amount of time spent in the gym that was going to transform me into a 6'6" Viking. And I had struggled in the past. But the point was, although I'd struggled, I'd made it through. I was still only 19, still growing, and with the drive and desire I had, I knew I'd only grow stronger. More than that, the journey he was proposing for me went against everything I wanted. It went against everything I knew about myself. I could have gone with the flow. It would have been so much easier to do that. But I knew I'd never be happy or content if I allowed someone else to make my decisions for me. I was being pulled in a different direction. I knew that I owed it to myself to follow that energy to see where it led me. For a few days afterwards, I could feel my thoughts shifting and reforming. To begin with, I couldn't quite work out what I needed to do. Then everything crystallized. I realized it was time for a change. The route that the warrant officer wanted me to take wasn't right for me, nor in fact was anything about the environment in the paras. It was becoming increasingly clear that my face just didn't fit. There was still nothing I wanted more than to become an elite soldier. But paradoxically, at this moment in my life, the army wasn't the place for me. A few weeks later, I started the process of leaving. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been like if I'd followed the path that the warrant officer had tried to send me on. Of course, events could have taken me in all sorts of directions. I'm not even going to try to speculate about what I might have ended up doing. Although I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have enjoyed the same sorts of highs and lows. But I do have a pretty good idea of how I might have ended up feeling. Trapped, bitter, resentful. That's what happens when you go against all your instincts and let other human beings govern your life. I'd have become a decision taker, not a decision maker. When you make a decision, you own it. For better or worse, you own its consequences. But the point is that you're still the author of your fate. You're acting in accordance with your will. When you let somebody else take those calls on your behalf, you're letting somebody else write your story. You'll forever be responding to their agenda, their priorities. That always leads to bitterness, frustration, and resentment. Because you know, your body knows, that you should be doing more. Why would you ever want to be in the position of watching somebody else thrive because they took decisions you didn't have the courage or the will to make yourself? I could have done that. Well, you didn't, so move on. Shoulda, coulda, woulda. You need to take yourself to those places because nobody else is going to take you. I'm not naive. I know that it's harder to be somebody who forces the pace, who makes decisions. But when you're always going along for the ride, then somebody else will always be driving. It might be fun and interesting, and yet you're not at the wheel. Only you. The surest way to end up trapped behind the wall is to live your life as a follower, not a leader. So don't be passive. Don't sit there waiting for somebody else to tell you what to do or think. The first thing you need to accept is that you're the person who has ultimate responsibility for how your life works out. You can't rely on others to save you. You can't rely on them to always have your best interests in mind, or even to know what you want and need from your life. That has to come from you. Be the leader of your own life. You need to lead yourself. And the great thing is, we're all capable of leading, even if most of the time we don't realise it. We think leaders are officers in the army, or managers at a company, or sports captains. We don't realise that leadership isn't about the badge on your chest or the band on your arm. It's about taking responsibility, being decisive, being dedicated. A good leader knows who we are and what our strengths and weaknesses are. They also want us to improve. Why not apply exactly the same principle to your own day-to-day life? The ultimate leadership is to be the leader of your own existence. What I mean by this is that you have to approach your own life with a leader's mindset. Imagine that you're a leader who has been given the task of maximising your own personal development. Everything you do has to help achieve this objective. That means prioritising your own needs and ambitions. That means demanding as much as you can from yourself. That's the mindset you should have when it comes to your own development. It's almost like a psychological trick, but I find it really helps you enter the right headspace. And if that's the mentality you adopt in your life, then there's very little that can stop you. Trust your instincts. Other human beings will try to shape your life for you. They might be parents, teachers, friends, or colleagues. A lot of the time, they'll be like that warrant officer who tried to make me take the translator's course. They'll give you a whole list of convincing reasons why you should follow the route they've suggested, and you won't necessarily have a decent response. All you'll have is a feeling that it's not right for you. In these situations, it's very easy to let yourself be swayed. You tell yourself that they probably know better and that they have your best interests at heart. So you pretend you haven't felt that niggling discomfort. You just hope that those doubts will disappear once you get your feet under the table at the new job your boss wanted you to apply for. Or once you really get to grips with the subject that your parents suggested you study at university. But this rarely happens. We know ourselves better than anybody else. Although we should generally listen to advice from other people, especially those who have more experience and expertise than we do, we should also make sure that it's us and us alone who are making the decisions about our future. That often means paying proper attention to the sometimes quite unclear messages our body sends us. If something doesn't feel right, then it's worth asking yourself very serious questions as to whether you should be doing it. Doing something because you know it will please other people isn't a good enough reason to ruin your own happiness or development. And just because someone else claims that they have your best interests at heart doesn't mean that they actually do. Only you know what's best for you. Your instincts are there for a reason, so make sure you listen to them. I did it my way. I've always done things my way, and that can get people hot and bothered. It happened on Mutiny. That's not how sailors do this, no, but it's how I do it. I realise that social media is driving that desire to compare ourselves with others. Even though we all know deep down that all we're seeing is a highlights reel, it's still hard to resist. That's something innate in us. When we look admiringly at other people's strengths, we tend to forget about or underrate the qualities that we possess. We're in such a rush to praise that person that we overlook the fact that they have weaknesses too. You're never going to be at peace with yourself if you're trying to compare yourself with others or imitate them. You're not them, and you never will be. If there's something about them that inspires you, then great, grab it. But you need to absorb that quality into who you are. not wear it on the surface like a badly fitted borrowed suit. When you try to ape someone else, you're diminishing who you are. You're cutting yourself off from your own unique potential. You're strangling your ability to grow. Instead of focusing on becoming somebody else, focus on you. You'll learn so much more, gain so many more rewards by making the most of the resources that are already within you. When you're younger, you'll probably audition lots of different versions of who you are. In your youth, you're much more magpie-like, taking traits from a whole range of people, often without thinking about it too much. You adopt the mannerisms of other people, copy their clothes. Sometimes you might imitate the way they dress. That's natural. One way of discovering who you are is by working out who you're not. What would be worrying is if you are still doing this later in life. There has to come a moment when you realise, shit, I've got to do me. Because if you're not doing that, when you enter the big wide world, then very soon you're going to find yourself completely lost. Lessons. If you live your life as a follower, not a leader, then you'll forever be living life on somebody else's terms. Be a decision maker, not a decision taker. Be a leader in your own life. Look out for your interests. Take responsibility. Demand the highest standards and the greatest levels of commitment. Do everything a good leader would do for their team, but do it for yourself. People will try to influence you to do things that they say are in your best interests. But if you take a step down that path and it doesn't feel right to you, then that's a sign that it probably isn't right for you. Don't be afraid to follow your instincts. Perhaps you're not yet the person you want to be, but then who is? We're all works in progress. But what you cannot do is pretend to be somebody you're not. You'll never get anywhere worth going by imitating other people. Stay true to yourself.